Timothy, our class was very happy to bring you goodies and such. And
We're just glad to see you.
glad you're back. Chase, would you put the slide on the correct number? It's written there on the computer. Lyndon, thank you, darling. Lyndon got me a new computer case, and you're going to fix that, bub?
Yeah.
Okay. And I cleaned it out and put all my stuff in my new case and accidentally left the clicker at home. So we have a new one, and so we're going to hope this works, and I hope the sound works. And good morning.
Good morning.
Listen, Christ is risen. And I am so glad to be here today and to be teaching you this morning. And we are looking, this is the book I'm going to write, I told you, but I really am not, because you've got the book already in your notes. But this is the second decree of one of the Persian kings who impacted the life of the Jews as they went home. Who was the first Persian king who made a decree to let the Jews go home?
Cyrus.
Good, King Cyrus. And he told them in his decree to rebuild the temple. And because of obstacles throughout Judah, they quit building on the temple and stopped until a next king came along. Who was that next king? Darius. Good, Darius. Uh-oh. Let's see what happens here. This may not work, guys. You're going to have to put it back on, honey, and then I'll... Okay, because this is real serious. We studied Darius when I introduced the prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. And we found in Haggai and Zechariah that they came on the scene in the second year of King Darius. All right, so here we go, and I'm really going to pray for this. Start praying, because this is my fault that it's not there. We're going to look at just as Cyrus issued a decree, so did Darius. Something's wrong. Oh, the left clicker? No, that's on the... Oh. Okay, so here we are. Ezra 5 and 6. Okay, we studied Ezra 1 through 4. Then we studied Haggai and Zechariah. And now we're ready for Ezra 5. I hope this week you will read Ezra 5 and Ezra 6. We are going to we looked at the obstacles to rebuilding the temple. The Samaritans were they were tenacious in their ability to obstruct the rebuilding of the temple. They intimidated the Jews. They threatened the Jews. They sabotaged their work. So then we're going to read today about a letter by a man named Tadaniah. And he wrote a letter to King Darius, and he said, the people are building what they're calling a temple. But it is so big that it could possibly be a fortress. The Jews, he said, are building it so rapidly that they could even be perhaps causing a revolt. Because you see, the kings of Persia were very concerned all of the time about the people revolting, because it was a huge empire. They had conquered many, many people, and many people rebelled against the Persian king. So he had governors throughout the whole Persian empire. And he said to them, you watch the people and make sure there is no revolt beginning. So this is one of the things that Tadaniah, the governor, was concerned about. And then King Darius in chapter 6 writes his letter. It's going to be so fun to read that letter because it is totally opposite of what we think King Darius is going to write. Do I see my little girl, Amy? Hi, Amy. How are you doing, sweetheart?
Good, you?
We're doing great. We've missed you so much. What grade are you in this year? Pardon? 10th grade. Oh, that is awesome. That is great. Well, welcome back. And how's all the new brothers and sisters? How many new brothers and sisters do you have?
I have 6 siblings.
6 siblings. Your mom and your dad adopted how many just this year? 3. All right. Well, welcome. That's awesome. Give a hand to Amy and her family. Because Amy's the oldest one, so you know what she's doing. All right. And then we're going to read the decree of King Darius, and they finally build the temple. Have we been waiting for a year? I remember, Rodney, when some of your guys, before they left, said, did the temple ever get rebuilt? Well, we're going to find out this week and next. So you tell them that the temple was rebuilt, okay? Here's the Persian Empire. This part right here in the red is the Babylonian Empire, and that's where we read Daniel and Ezekiel when they were in exile. King Cyrus of Persia and the Medes conquered Babylon and sent all the people home. And so the new Persian Empire is much bigger than the Babylonian, isn't it? And we see that it went from India way over here, the Indus River, all the way through Iran and Persia and up into Turkey, down into Syria, Judah, and all the way down in parts of Saudi Arabia and eventually Egypt. A big, big empire. In fact, they had what the kings divided this empire into 127 provinces. And of those provinces, there was a governor. And so those governors had a big job collecting the taxes, maintaining peace throughout the empire. So let's look at the kings of Persia. This is really important. This is on page 80 of your notes. If you didn't get the notes today, you have to have your notes. So raise your hand if you need notes. Lyndon, did you get notes, babe?
I got notes.
Who gave them to you? All right. I told a little girl to bring you the notes. I've asked Lyndon to show me his notes just because I'm a teacher, right? And he said, well, nobody gave me any. How many of you have to pick up your own notes, right? All right. So if you need a note, raise your hand. All right, here are the list of the kings of Persia. The Persian Empire lasted from 539 BC, 539 years before Christ, to the time of Alexander the Great, 330 BC. So it lasted 200 years. And it was a powerful, powerful nation that whole time. So on page 80, you see the Persian kings. The first one is Cyrus the Great. And he ruled from 550 to 529 BC. So beside that, write Ezra 1 through 4. If you want to read about King Cyrus the Great in the Bible, then you read Ezra 1 through 4. And you might want to add this, chapter 5, 1 and 2. And, well, chapter 5 and 6 as well. Fact is, put Ezra 1 through 6. No, wait a minute. No. I jumped. Ezra 1 through 4. I'm right there. You might also want to write his decree. His decree, what was it? The Cyrus cylinder, where he freed all the people of Judah and allowed them to go home and to rebuild the temple. So with Cyrus the Great, put Ezra 1 through 4 and the Cyrus cylinder so that you will remember his decree. Was he a believer in the God of heaven and earth? No. Not really, because he believed in all kinds of gods. There's somebody at our door, and I'm not sure they want in. Can you help him, Cindy? The door is locked, Cindy. We got to let Judy in. Come in here, Judy.
We charge her money since she's late.
All right, so the second king is Cyrus the Great's son, Cambyses II. He only ruled for like 7 years. And when he died of gangrene because he got into some kind of an accident in Egypt. In fact, he was the one who conquered Egypt for Persia. Until he came along, Egypt was not a part of the Persian Empire. And he got an infection and died of gangrene. And so there was no one to take his place. He didn't have a son. So there was this one guy, and I don't remember his name, but you can find this all on pages 43 to 47 in your notes, the history of the next king, Darius. So look back in your notes, see if you can find pages 43 to 47. If you don't have them, I will send them to you this week if you will text me. All right? Because it's real interesting. A man who said that he was a brother of Cambyses, which he was not, took the throne. He was called a usurper. And so they knew that he was not the one to be king. So several nobles, 6 of them in fact, attacked this usurper, killed him, and defeated him. So now we have 6 guys vying for the throne. All righty? So what are we going to do? They decided that they would meet the next morning at dawn. Does anybody remember from when we studied this how they determined who would be king at dawn the next morning? Kirk.
The horse.
The horse. Tell us about the horse.
Whoever's horse made a noise or something first.
Whoever's horse neighed first would become king. And that was it. And if you want to read that, you can read that. If you just Google Darius, you'll read about some of those stories, really good stories. And so Darius's horse neighed first. So he became the king, and he reigned a long time. He is considered one of the greatest kings of Persia. He was the greatest builder. He was a great king. He ruled for that many years. 22 plus 14 is a long time. Okay?
36 years.
Thank you. So you will read about him in Ezra 5 and 6. We're going to read about him today. So put that in your notes, that if you want to read about Darius the Great, you will read him in Ezra chapters 5 and 6. You will read about him in Haggai, because Haggai was written in the 2nd year of King Darius. So looking at this chart, his 2nd year was 520. And you will read about him in Zechariah. Okay? Then we have Xerxes, and he was Esther's husband. So you might want to put the book of Esther here. He wrote a decree as well. In fact, he wrote 2 decrees, and Esther wrote 1. All impacting the Jews. The next king we have is Artaxerxes. He worked during the time of Nehemiah. You will read about him in Ezra 7 through 12. And you will read about him in the book of Nehemiah and Malachi and Daniel, except Daniel doesn't mention him. Daniel wrote the greatest prophecy in the whole Bible, Daniel 9. And he said, when you hear about the decree to rebuild Jerusalem and its walls, you will know that that is the starting point of when we start counting as to when the Messiah will come. Artaxerxes made that decree. He told Nehemiah, you go home, rebuild Jerusalem, and rebuild the walls. And you've heard of Daniel's 70 weeks? Yes? Yes. That was what Artaxerxes, that's where we read here about Artaxerxes. That's the beginning of Daniel's 70 weeks. Listen up. Don't worry. We'll get there. I promise you. Because it's really a wonderful, wonderful study. But first of all, we have to study Darius and Ezra. We have to study Esther. And then we will study Nehemiah and Artaxerxes. Isn't that exciting? You see, this is history. This is how we know there is a God. How do we know there is a God? Because of prophecy and the fulfillment of prophecy. And not just a close fulfillment, but a fulfillment to the most intimate, smallest details. God's never late. He keeps his promises. And that's how we know, because this right here is some of the greatest prophecies in the whole Bible. And we don't even know them because we haven't studied them. We haven't studied our history. We don't really know how God has just put his hands in the glove of humankind, and he has overruled man and overruled his desires, overruled his plans, and God has shown his sovereignty. So exciting to me to get to study it. We're going to study it when Lori brings our story of Esther. By the way, give yourself a few more weeks. Okay? All right. So then we go all the way down, and we don't really read about these men in the Bible because they're not in the Bible. But these men are. And then finally we get down to Darius III when he is conquered by Alexander the Great. And that's the end of the Persian Empire as we know it in the scriptures. So let's see. Oh, you can't even read that. Lights, please. Here we're going to read about Darius the Great, the one whose horses neighed first. He's the one who became king. And we know that he followed Cyrus and he worshiped other gods, but he also honored the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He called him the God of heaven and earth. And you will not see any Persian gods or Babylonian gods or Greek gods who are the God of heaven and earth. This is the only God even in the mythology, who is the God of heaven and earth. That's our God, and that's the one we worship. So Darius had a lot of building projects. You want to go back to pages 43 and 47 in your notes. And I really hope that you will Google each one of these things because they're so fascinating. YouTube these things because you will find a lot of great history. He had the Behistun inscription made, and that is on your notes, and we'll look at that in a moment. He built 2 palaces in Susa and Persepolis. And when we read about Esther, she is in the palace in Susa. And when we read Nehemiah, he's working in the palace for King Artaxerxes in the capital city of Susa. He built a canal. We thought that we were the ones that built the Suez Canal. There are other kings. There was a Pharaoh who tried to build a canal, didn't ever make it. But King Darius did build a canal. He had a route from the Mediterranean Sea down the Nile River to the Red Sea, and I'll show you a map, and then on the way down the Red Sea to Persia. He wanted a water route to Persia, and he got it right here. And we'll look at that. And he began the Persian Wars between Greece and Persia. So let's look at the Behistun, and let's just the lights again, because this is so cool. That's good. Just leave up the other one too. Thank you. What's your name? Lewis, yeah. I was trying to say Chris, and I said, that's not right. Thank you, Lewis. This is the Behistun inscription. It is on a huge, huge side of a cliff in Iran. You've got to climb at least 30 feet to get there. There is no way to get there unless you can rappel. There's some interesting stories on how they've been rappelling up there. And how he got his carvers up there, I don't know. But he has these life-size men, and these men right here, you can't really tell on the picture, but they have ropes around their necks. Those are represent all of the nations that Darius and Cyrus conquered. They were their slaves. Here is his guy who holds the bow and arrow. Here's the guy who holds King Darius's lance. And here's King Darius right here. And you'll notice that his foot is on a man. Can you see that? That is the man who tried to usurp the throne, and he defeated him. And so that's what this picture is. This is the Persian god, and down here you can see writing. I've forgotten how many columns, like 14 columns of writing. And what he's doing is telling his story of his victories. So he made it a pretty good story. He was a hero. That's called the Behistun inscription, and it's on Mount Behistun in western Iran. So now we'll look at the lights, and stay there because we're going to have to do some more lights. But it's just real quickly, it's like 20 by 9 feet, and it depicts his bow carrier and his lance carrier, and he has 9 conquered peoples with ropes around their necks. A 10th figure is laying under the king's feet, and that's the man he defeated. And then underneath is a panel. All of those panels underneath that picture are panels of cuneiform writing, and nobody could read it for years and years and hundreds of years. That was done in the 500s years before Christ. It wasn't until the 1800s that we actually learned, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say we, they actually learned to read cuneiform. And those 3 columns, I messed it up, Bubba. Those 3 columns are written in ancient Babylonian, in Elamite, and Persian. And it wasn't until the middle of the 1800s that scholars actually learned to read this, and they based it on the Elamite because that was the one they could kind of read. And they found that each of those columns were all the same story, but written in 3 different languages. So just as the Rosetta Stone taught us how to read ancient Greek, so the Behistun inscription taught us how to read ancient cuneiform, because they were all written with the same story, and they learned how to read one, and then they could translate the others. It's fascinating. And that's how we really learned to read ancient cuneiform. So the 3 texts have provided the key for deciphering cuneiform. And it was the Rosetta Stone that helped scholars learn to read what? I'm sorry, I said ancient Greek, that's not right. The hieroglyphics, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. And they did that in the 1800s also. All right, so here's this inscription again. Any questions on that? Okay, so that's what he did. Here's his canal. This right here is the Mediterranean Sea, all right? And this is all the tributaries of the Nile River. Look what the Nile does. It starts down here and it goes this way, and it breaks off into all kinds of tributaries. I didn't know that till I studied my map. And so what he did was he took the shortest tributary to the Red Sea right here, and he came down this way and built this canal from here to down to here. And part of it they had to just slide their boats over. But that was the canal that Darius built, because he wanted to be able to get from the Mediterranean Sea down the Nile River to the Red Sea, and then you go down and back up the Persian Gulf. Yes, ma'am?
This right here that you were just talking about, is that close to Petra, that city?
No, that is not close to Petra. Petra is way down by the Dead Sea in Jerusalem, by Jerusalem, okay? All right. In addition to that, I taught you about Darius building the royal road. It was a postal road. So lights again, guys. Thank you, Lewis and Cindy. The royal road was their postal system. It was just like our Pony Express. And they started down here in Susa, right here, and it followed pretty much the Euphrates River, and then it broke out into Turkey, and then they had little roads coming off of it, north and south. and they would ride that. And instead of taking 3 months for a letter to get from the king's palace in Susa, it would take, at the most, 15 days. So when we read, and they would use horses and mules and camels and whatever they could get to go down those roads. So that's what we modeled, really, our Pony Express after. And you remember when I taught you that? So look that up, and you'll read it and write down Pony Express, and you'll see. In fact, as Herodotus said, neither snow nor hail nor rain nor sleet can stop these couriers. Does that sound familiar? And so that's where we got that motto, was from the Persian Empire. I love it. So that's the Royal Road. And he started the Greek and Persian Wars, which lasted 50 years. Millions of soldiers died in those battles because what he was trying to do was to, there we go. What Darius was trying to do was to conquer Greece. And so he sent his soldiers over there and his armies and his navy over there, but he didn't do very well. In fact, the first battle was called the Battle of Marathon. And the Greeks defeated the Persians in the Battle of Marathon. And from Marathon to Athens was a distance of 26 miles. And they had a runner named Phidippides, right here, Phidippides. He ran from the town of Marathon, where the battle was, to Athens to give word to the people of Athens that they had won. And from that, what do we have today? The marathon of how many miles? 26. Interesting, isn't it? So Lyndon and I were in Greece, and we saw him, Phidippides. We didn't see the real Phidippides. He was really old. And that's the statue they have right on the road between Marathon and Athens. So that's just some of the review that we did when we studied Darius. Go into your notes, or today's notes, and just Google all of that. You'll just spend your whole day reading, and you'll have fun. Open up your YouTube and look up Battle of Marathon, and they will tell you the whole story of Phidippides. I think that door must be locked too. All right, so let's look at page 80, letter A at the bottom. What king were we studying? Darius. Darius the First, the Great. So you need to really remember that, because he's the third king that we're studying. And he ruled, in letter A, from what to what? Yes. And Haggai and Zechariah both said that they prophesied during the second year of Darius. So when was that? Look at this and see if you can find out when his second year would be. 521. Or 520, probably. Yeah, 520. All right. So, whoops, got to be careful here. Now, number one, review those pages in your notes. If you don't have those pages, tell Maddox he's doing so well. There's Maddox right over there. How old is Maddox now? He's 4. He had a donut a while ago. Hi, Maddox.
Hi, Maddox.
He's waving to everybody. He's doing so well. Look at if you want pages 43 to 47, what do?
Text you. Look in your notes.
Text me. I will email them to you, and you can copy them, okay? Now, number 2, Darius was a great builder. Which inscription helped scholars decode cuneiform? The Behistun. And it's comparable to what stone in decoding Greek hieroglyphs? In fact, but you should change that word Greek. What was wrong with me? That shouldn't be Greek hieroglyphics. What should it be? Egyptian. Fix that. See, that's your job, to find mistakes. That was number 2. He built 2 capital, what? Cities, Persepolis and Susa. He built a canal from what? The Nile River to the... Because he wanted a water route from the Mediterranean all the way over to Persia.
I'm sorry, what was the name of the sea?
Red.
Yeah, from the Nile River to the Red Sea. We know about the Red Sea. And then he expanded and improved the royal road, which Cyrus had built. And what did we model after the royal road?
Pony Express.
Thank you, Mike. Pony Express. Number 4. This is going to be our lesson for this week and next. King Darius issued a decree, just like Cyrus did. And it had just as much power and authority behind it as Cyrus's did. And it was regarding the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. I made some mistakes on that line too. I must have been doing this during the Thunder game. I don't know. Letter A, do you know the details regarding the surrounding of his decree? If you read chapter 5 of Ezra, you will know the details of what happened. We're going to do it today. And do you know what that decree said? Yes or no? No? Okay. Oh, good. Anybody yes? Oh, good, Stephanie. When did you learn that, Stephanie? Yesterday. Because? What did you do to learn it? If I had a sticker, I'd give you one. I've got to find my stickers. All right. Let's go over to page 81 in our notes. And we're going to read what happened with this letter. You're going to love this. Roman numeral 2 is Ezra 5, page 81. Everything okay, Sue? You got everything? Martha? On page 80, number 3. Oh, I didn't answer that, did I? Darius is known for beginning the Persian wars against what nation? Greece. And it really wasn't a nation at that time. It was just a bunch of little city-states. He lost at what battle? Marathon. The Battle of Marathon. Okay? Now, let's look at the rebuilding of the temple, Ezra 5. In Ezra 5, we're going to meet some new people and re-meet some other people. The first group of people we're going to re-meet are preachers, prophets, and priests. Who are the prophets and the preachers in this chapter, in Ezra 5 and 6? Who would be the prophets? Good. Haggai and Zechariah. Who was the priest?
Josh.
Yes, Joshua. So the Haggai and Zechariah are the prophets. They were great preachers, and Joshua was the high priest. We're going to meet some government officials. We'll meet some new ones and re-meet some other ones. Let's look at the government officials. Whoops. We meet King Darius. We all know King Darius now, right? Okay. We will meet Governor Zerubbabel. We know him. We will meet Governor Tadonai. We don't know him. And we're going to meet some of Tadonai's associates. Tadonai was the governor now, and there's some real confusion on the part of Bible students as if Zerubbabel was still the governor. Remember, it's 16 years later. He was probably the governor of the province of Judah, but he wasn't a top governor of all of the area of Syria and Phoenicia and Palestine. So I want to show you that. Okay. Here is a map of from Babylon, and here's Susa right here. It's still near Babylon. And here's the Euphrates River, and it goes up this way, down through, this is Syria, down through Phoenicia, Palestine, which includes Samaria and Jerusalem. Tadonai, according to the scriptures, was governor of the Persian region west of the Euphrates River. So that's all of this area. He was the governor of that whole area. And so we need to find on here, that's called, by the way, in the scriptures, the Trans-Euphrates River, beyond the river. So if you're in Babylon, beyond the river is all of that area that I just showed you, all of this area. So we want to find the capital city of Susa, and we want to find Babylon. Then we're going to follow the river. All of this area is Syria, which today is Damascus. Phoenicia is the cities of Sidon and Tyre. And then we want to find Samaria. That's the Jews' enemies, as well as many others. And finally, the province of Judah with the capital city of Jerusalem. Tadani was governor of all of this area. Yes, sir.
Was that the same route that Paul or Saul became later Paul took when he was on his road to Damascus?
Well, he started I think he started up where I don't know if he started from Jerusalem or from his home in Tarsus. What?
I thought he was on his way from Jerusalem.
Okay, so he would have followed that route probably, yeah, up to Damascus. In fact, there's a road, and I've got it written down somewhere because I like to study the roads written in the Bible. And there is the road to Damascus. And I'm not sure what it's called, though. That's 600 years later. Okay. All right. All right. So, he was the governor of all of that area. It was his job, Tadani's job, to make sure that everybody paid their taxes. And he collected the taxes and sent them back to Susa. And then it was his job to make sure that there was no what? Revolting, no revolutions. Nobody can stand against the king. And it was his job to make sure that he maintained peace. So he was watching everybody, wasn't he? It was his job to watch everybody. So let's see what he wrote. Exodus 4:24, we know it was the second year of King Darius. Haggai says the second year was September 21, 520 BC. Now look at your notes on page 81, and I'm going to read this to you. You fill in the blanks as we go, if you can, and if you can't, I will help you. Letter A. Now, Haggai, the prophet. Remember, if you're going to read Ezra, what prophets do you have to read? Haggai and Zechariah. You read them at the same time. So we have Haggai the prophet and Zechariah the prophet prophesied to the Jews in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them. And we know it was 520 BC, the second year of King Darius. How do we know that?
The Bible says
Where does the Bible tell us it was in the second year of Darius? Haggai 1 and Zechariah 1 tells us exactly when they prophesied, and that was it. Now Zerubbabel, who was the appointed governor when they came to Jerusalem, and Joshua, the high priest, set to work to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem. This is 16 years after they'd laid the first foundation. And now they're going to set to work and rebuild it. And the prophets of God were with them, supporting them. That's verses 1 and 2 and 3. All right. At that time, I messed up. So I'm going to read to you on your paper here. At that time, Tadani, governor of Trans-Euphrates, on the west side of the Euphrates River, all that area, and his associates went to the Jews and asked, "Who authorized you to rebuild this temple?" When you ask someone, where did you get your authority to rebuild this temple? Who authorized you? Who did authorize them to rebuild the temple? Cyrus the Great authorized them to rebuild the temple. And verse 4, they also asked, what are the names of those who are constructing this building? Hey, that'd be kind of scary, wouldn't it? When the king of Persia, his people come to you and say, who authorized you to do this? What are the names of all these people out here building? So I wonder how scared they were. Look at verse 5. I love this verse. This is what we do when we face opposition. When people say to you, who authorized you to do this? Who told you to do this? And if you know, then you say, God or whomever. Because here's what you know. The eye of your God was watching over the elders of the Jews. They knew that. And they were not stopped in their work. And here's what's really cool. They didn't stop. Nobody even tried to stop them until a report could go to Darius. Who's Darius? The king. And his written reply be received. They knew the eye of God was watching them. And so they said, we will not stop our work until Tadonai writes a letter to the king and the king sends his reply. This is a copy of the letter that Tadonai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and all of his associates, the officials of Trans-Euphrates, sent to King Darius. Now this is Ezra who wrote this book. We haven't even met Ezra yet. We won't meet the real man Ezra until chapter 7 of Ezra. But Ezra's writing this book. He's a scribe. He's a genius. He's a teacher. And he kept the reports for Israel. So he kept a copy of the letter of Governor Tadonai to the king. Now let's look at page 81. Number 1 under letter A. Number 1, verses 1 through 5. Tadonai and his associates saw what? The work of the Jews in Jerusalem. What were they doing? Rebuilding, not a wall, the temple. Letter A, he challenged the Jews on their what? Authorization. He said, who authorized you to rebuild this temple? Letter B, he also asked the Jews for what? The names of the builders. And number 2, the Jews had nothing to hide. They were not afraid. You're going to find here, they were not in any way afraid to answer the question because they knew the eye of their God was upon them. Furthermore, they had Cyrus's decree. All righty? The Jews had nothing to hide. They knew what? The eye of the Lord was upon them, and the work was allowed to go on while they waited for King Darius's what? Reply to the letter. So we're going to read now the letter to the king. This is the report they sent Darius. It read like this, according to Ezra, to King Darius. Cordial greetings. I like that. That's just the way we write letters, isn't it? That's the inside address, and that's the greeting. The king should know. He's telling them, we're doing our work as governor here. The king should know that we went to the district of what? Judah, to the temple of the great God. The people are building it with large stones and placing the timbers in the walls. We're going to find later that the stones were 3 stories high, and then above that was a story of timbers. And they were getting that far, placing the timbers in the walls. The work is being carried on with diligence and is making rapid progress under their direction. They've really gotten motivated, haven't they? We questioned the elders and we asked them, who what? Who authorized you to rebuild this temple? Who told you to do this and to finish it? And according to Tadonai writing to the king, we also asked them their Names. So that we could write down the names of the leaders for your information. Why do they think the king might want this? In case there was a revolt, then we have the names of the leaders. We also asked them their names so that we could write down the names of, okay. All right, so let's look at letter B on page 81. Did you get all those blanks in the verses? Yes. Anybody need help? Okay, let's look at number 1 at the bottom, verses 6 through 10. Their letter to King Darius detailed their concerns about what? The rebuilding of the temple. And here is the questions that they were probably asking themselves. Did those large stones and timbers make the structure look more like a fortress than a sanctuary? Now, I read that into that because we know how many revolts were going on under King Darius, and they were watching for this. Was this a fortress? They're saying it's a temple. Maybe it's a fortress. And then look at letter B. Perhaps the Jews were working so quickly and so rapidly in order to perhaps plan a revolt. So they were letting the king know. And on page 82, he informed the king as to the two.
Next week, got 80 and 81.
You got done.
Oh.
Look at that evil look. If looks could kill, you'd be dead.
Jerry, get you some help, darling. I was trying to make a record today and do 3 pages. I'm going to get there too.
Jerry didn't believe you could do it.
I know. Jerry didn't think I could do it. All right, let's look up here. We'll go ahead and read some verses. The Jews were not afraid to tell Tadonai their history. He said, who authorized you? They said, we'll tell you. Listen up what they did. Here's what the answer that they gave Tadonai. This is on page 80. What page is that on? 82. And we'll do the question above in just a moment. This is the answer. Here's what the Jews said to Tadonai. Tadonai is writing it on a letter to King Darius. Are you understanding that? Yes? All right. This is the answer they gave us. We are the servants of God of heaven and earth. And we are rebuilding what? The temple that was built many years ago. One that a great king of Israel built and finished. Who was that king of Israel? Solomon. So write the name Solomon in there. But because our ancestors angered the God of heaven, he gave our ancestors into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the Chaldean, king of Babylon. Put right here 586 BC so you will know that that's when that happened. Solomon's temple was built and finished in 930 BC. It was destroyed in 586 BC. So you can figure out all those years, all right? And he destroyed the temple and deported the people to Babylon. However, now here's what their authorization is. I love this. However, the Jews told Tadonai, in the first year of Cyrus, when was that? 539 BC, king of Babylon, King Cyrus, we call him king of Persia, but he was king of Babylon by that time, issued a decree to rebuild this house of God. Who was their authorization? Cyrus, King Cyrus. Cyrus even removed from the temple of Babylon the gold and silver articles of the house of God. You can write Ezra 1 if you want to see the inventory of the silver and gold articles. 54 1,200 pieces of silver and gold that Cyrus sent back, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to the temple in Babylon. Cyrus removed all that treasures and sent it back with Zerubbabel. Then, according to the Jews, King Cyrus gave them to a man named Sheshbazzar. That was his Persian name. His Hebrew name was what? Zerubbabel, whom he had appointed governor. We know all that, don't we? Yes? Right, Connie?
Right.
All right. And he told Zerubbabel, take these articles and go and deposit them in the temple in Jerusalem and rebuild the house of God on its site. Who's authorizing them to rebuild this temple? Cyrus. King Cyrus. And they're writing now to Darius, the king. I love that. All right. Verse 16. So this Sheshbazzar, who was Zerubbabel, came and laid the foundations of the house of God in Jerusalem. From that day to the present, it has been under construction, but is not yet finished. Did you get all that filled in?
12.
Verse 12. Because our ancestors angered the God of heaven, he gave them into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the Chaldean king of Babylon, and you can write Persia, Babylon, who destroyed this temple and exiled or deported the people to Babylon. So what the Jews are doing is telling Tad and I their history, aren't they? And so they're writing the history now to Darius. So I want us to go on down, and we'll finish the blanks in a moment. Let's look on down at what Tadonai says to King Darius. He's told this whole story, and he says, so I'm asking you to do something for me, King Darius. If it pleases the king, Darius, let a search be made in the royal archives of Babylon to see if King Cyrus did in fact issue a decree to rebuild this house of God in Jerusalem. Then let the king send us his decision in this matter. So let's finish number 1, letter C, number 1 on page 82. Tadonai, the governor, has related the history of whom? The Jews and their temple. And to whom is he relating it? King Darius. Letter A. They told about the building of Solomon's what? Temple and its destruction.
And it's what?
Its destruction.
What was tonight related the history of the blank?
Of the Jews and their temple. And in this relating of the history, they told about Solomon's temple, and they told about its destruction by Nebuchadnezzar. Then letter B, they then said King Cyrus issued a decree and told us to go home and rebuild the temple. That's called Cyrus's cylinder, isn't it? So King Cyrus's decree and his return of the temple articles. Yeah. And then letter C, they noted that from the day the temple foundation was laid. So we're thinking that it had to have been another foundation 16 years later. At least they had to redo a whole lot of that foundation because it had been 16 years, no work had been done. So it had to either be relayed or fixed, because they said from the time that it was relayed again or repaired, the temple has been under construction ever since that time, but it's not yet finished. So number 2, I said apparently a new temple foundation had to be laid. We read in Haggai where Zerubbabel laid Which stone? The cornerstone of the foundation, and construction continued. Cornerstone of the foundation. And then letter D, the request of King Darius by Tadani, search the archives and see if you can find this decree. Right? Because here is the law of the Medes and the Persians. This is important. We're going to read about this in Esther, but we read about it right here. The law of the Medes and the Persians is this. If a king makes a decree, nobody can change it. It can never, never be changed by anybody. So the reason they are so serious about finding King Cyrus's decree was because if they find it, they cannot change it, and the Jews can rebuild the temple. So what are we hoping is going to happen? That they find it. All right, so letter D, number 1, Tadani's request to Darius, please check what? The archives, and see if Cyrus had in fact issued a decree to the Jews to rebuild the temple or the house of God in Jerusalem. Oh, I hope they find it. What answer do you think Tadani expects from King Darius? What do you think, Kirk? You're shaking your head. What?
He expected a no.
I'm sorry?
He expected a no.
They expected Darius to say, they don't have any authorization at all. Do what you need to do. So we're going to find out next week what King Darius writes. So you're going to have to come back and find out what, and we did finish. Any questions on this? Now, what?
You get to, at the very top of C,
Oh, page 82, the very top.
number 2.
He informed. Who is he? Tadani. Informed the king. Who's the king? Darius. As to his 2 questions in his investigation. Who gave the Jews authorization to rebuild? Not permission is kind of a weaker word, isn't it? And then letter B, what are the names of the builders? Now, who would like to tell me really, really quickly a summary of chapter 5 so we will all remember?
Correspondence.
What?
Correspondence.
There's a correspondence between whom and whom? Or from whom? From Tadani to Darius. About what?
Rebuilding of the temple.
Rebuilding of the temple. Because he is afraid that the Jews might be doing what?
Building a fortress.
Instead of a temple. And that they might be planning a revolt. So he asks them for their names. And then he writes to the king and he says, here's this story. And he says, search the archives and see if they're telling the truth. What do you think? Isn't that great?
Yeah.
How many of you have read this chapter with understanding before? Dorothy has. Was your hand up, Dorothy? Good, good. I really want you to read it again this week. You will love it. And if you want to know what happened, read Ezra 6. And we will find out what happened. So until you read it, pray for the Jews. All right. In this, okay, listen up, because we got to go. In this chapter, we see the providential hand of God. God is working here, overruling Tadani, overruling Darius, and we're going to see how God keeps his promises to his people. Numbers 23:19. God is not a man that he should lie, nor is he a man that he would change his mind. If he makes a promise, will he not do it? If he says something, will he not keep his word? Isn't that beautiful? That's what we need to remember here, because we're going to find that God keeps his word to his people. His eye is on them. And I better pray. Thank you for letting me be your teacher. Thank you, Father, for your word. Lord, I just pray that people will read this week and rejoice because we can see your hand in this event that they couldn't see. But looking back through the eyes of history, we can see how you worked miracles. And Lord, we just expect that in our lives too. We pray, Father, for the people in this class who need a miracle. And there are many people who need miracles today in their personal lives and in the lives of their families. I need a miracle in the life of our daughter. I pray, Lord, that you will be working in their lives, and we don't even see it, but we can be assured that you are working, and we can count on you, and you will not leave us nor forsake us. Your eye is on us, and we will not quit our work until you call us home. And it's in the name of our Savior, Jesus Christ, that we pray. Amen. God bless you.